So, AI and practice design. Before you go, I actually want to just preface this by saying I've thought about talking with AI chatbots and training them on practice design through either an ecological lens or through the lens of sports science and sports coaching science. And every effort I've tried so far, it comes up with traditional approaches, which drives me nuts. So I gave up very quickly. What's your experience?
So, the way that AI works is it's designed to give you the answers as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
It's to make you happy,
Yep.
which obviously sucks when it comes to practice design. And, well, depending on the practice that you're trying to design, it's not great. It's very limiting because it'll just give you the answers, tell you what to do, tell you how to behave, and write the piece of content for you, or tell you how you're feeling and how to take the next step.
Hmm.
Something as I've been interacting with it and I've used it as kind of a brainstorming tool just to kind of, especially as I've been ill but still need to get work done. I don't have the capacity I normally have for just doing all of the things. I just want to get something and make it more visible and easier for me to move forward because that's actually my intention to move forward. And
Hmm.
so I have been watching how AI interacts with me and then showing other people, and they're like, That's really different. I don't have my AI doesn't do that. My AI doesn't ask that." And a lot of what it does is I recognize whenever, and I think this is used across the board with AI, it's designed to reflect us back at us.
Hmm. Yeah. Well,
And we've discussed this multiple times before, that it basically is we are, when we use AI, we are coaching ourselves because actually we're sort of like we're asking questions the AI is reflecting, mimicking back to us.
depending on the training data, yeah.
Yeah, it's basically just going, well, this is this and this and this and this and this and this. So I was like, how can I use its action capabilities as such to do the thing I want to do? So I started asking it questions and seeing the responses. Now, it cannot perceive directly. That like
It's not
it,
an
it
organism.
it's not an organism. It is a computer program.
Yes.
That's what it is. So it has to be given instruction.
Yep.
So the instructions I gave it was don't give me all the answers. That's simplified down from what it actually is, which
Yeah.
is basically ask me questions. I want to reflect and be in a messy space. Don't try and tidy up for me. And that's what it does, is it just tries to tidy things up. So I have a bunch of custom instructions related to that. I have a bunch of context related to ecological like design and psychology and how it et cetera, as well as the four C's and my own personal interpretation of that. And
The four
over
C's from effective
time,
coaching.
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Wanted to clarify because new
yes,
listeners and all that.
yes. Again, I'm just too excited about this. And so I was like, okay, cool. And also, it has memory. Chat. I use the paid version of ChatGPT, so it has memory. So it remembers. This remembers. It stores the information that I have, and it knows how I interact because it stores it and remembers it. And I tell it, and it gave some interesting responses.
I was going to say, so what were the responses?
And it became really useful, especially in this last 2 weeks when I have been not very well, grief, and then obviously you have the US. My friends in the US are not having a great time right now. I don't know anyone who is, but all of that. So there's a lot of layers. So I was like, okay, cool. Could I use this to not create content for me, generate really shit stuff? Can I actually use it as a reflective tool where it will mirror back me, basically. It will say what I'm saying back to me because it wants to make me happy. That is its design. And then can I reflect back to it?
So what sort of practice design? Is it creating a practice design or are you working with it through practice?
I'm working with it through practice, I think would be the more accurate representation.
Okay.
It's the it is a very open-ended conversation, so maybe it is not a highly constrained practice design. but it is designed just for reflection. So it's designed to help me find the next step that I want to take when I'm feeling a little bit sick. Good timing. See, beautiful. Could I do it without it? Yes.
I'm just thinking with regards to education of intention or attention, it sounds like it's helping to educate your intentions.
Yes. So it educates my intentions and then helps decide, like it kind of goes through the process of helping me decide the attention and where I put my attention. When I say it, I need to be careful because I should not personify it because it's not it doing it, it's me. It's just bringing it to the forefront. It is providing me information, and I am attuning to the information that the AI perceives. And sometimes it misses still, but I know that. And the more I practice that, the easier it becomes for me because obviously confidence, competence. I'm gaining competency by doing the skill. And it's kind of cool. It's fun. It's a nice way of because often for those in like the industry that I work in, this is really hard to practice because there's not very many psychologically safe places where you can go, hmm, um, I don't know what I'm doing and I need to do things and how do I do it? Whenever you do this in business, everyone just gives you an answer, and there are not many spaces just for exploration. Whereas this is a place for exploration and it is a fairly psychologically safe space if you understand the limitations of the tool. That is the important part. You understand that it has constraints, and those constraints are it is not a human. It is not human. And once you have that awareness, it's interesting what you can do.
Yep. So I guess where my curiosity lies is application in environments where someone is able, more capable to be reflective. When someone is less able or less skilled, it is typically easier to aid that person because there is more scope for development. So when there is someone with higher levels of expertise and self-reflection, where do you reckon the AI conversation would go, or have you explored that already?
I mean, I am quite a reflective person. It goes into multiple different places, which is really interesting.
I was just thinking because you're not well at the moment. Some of the conversations might have been like the aid would be useful, more useful because
Yeah,
you're unwell at the moment. And then in the
yeah.
future, would you want
Um,
more of a response, less of a response? How would it change, or the same?
I think what it would do, it would just because I have told it to adjust to my tone, which it already does, but I have reinforced that instruction in my custom instructions. So it's like you will adapt to how I talk. So an example of this yesterday is I was writing the sales page and brainstorming through like what the sales page for this offer that I'm making is. And I was like, right, you are just saying everything that I'm saying is good, and it's really annoying me. Like, tell me, I want you to look critically. We'll look critically together at this and pull it apart because AI does have a tendency to just make you happy.
Hmm.
And so I am in charge of the entire conversation, depending on my capacity and what that means. So as I'm more well, I'll want maybe higher critique, or maybe I will want this or that. But it's primed as such to be reflective, not fixing, which is fun. And the responses. I gave it to someone who is another coach, and I think I've designed this more for business coaches who have some expertise in coaching, because I think that would be more effective and easier to attune to the information because they have that coaching, or people who are self-reflective people or self-development. There's a few little avenues where it could go, but it's definitely more useful for people who already have some form of self-reflection practices, just are a bit exhausted, tired, low
So
capacity.
could I use it being the AI conversation, Could I use AI conversation as a reflective tool after a trampoline session, for example?
Possibly. I'd be very intrigued to see. I'll send you the custom instructions. I
Okay.
don't know.
Yeah, because the way that I see my coaching reflection at the moment is the way that I see all of the other coaching reflections and reflections just in general that I have. It is within me. I don't need to externally share any of the reflections because there is nothing that comes out of putting it on a piece of paper or writing it on an Excel spreadsheet or anything like that, apart from unless you need to do it for a qualitative assessment or a quantitative assessment for a national governing body qualification, which I'm currently doing at the moment. And I hold up this massive book, was a waste of printing, but hey ho, that's national governing bodies for you. Uh, had to get that in. I'm finishing it off at the moment. It's driving me nuts. Uh, so
I, I, I definitely don't think for you. I think it isn't really designed for someone like yourself. I think it's for people who like, and on the sales page I'm writing at the moment about this, it's like a journaling. It's an interactive journal. One of the kind
mm,
of analogies I've used is an interactive journal
that's how I was thinking about it.
because it is like that. And it's interesting because I don't like journals because they're static and
Yep.
they're like so it's adding just that little bit of like variability because you don't know what the AI will see because it's a bot.
Yep. Something.
It kind of links quite nicely to tools for like solo RPG. So there's a bunch of tools for storytelling and writing stories, which are like random cards that you draw, story engine, stuff like that, where you roll dice and things. I see it like that. It's kind of like an oracle of sorts. You roll a dice and it adds that randomness in, that variability, which makes you go, "Oh, I didn't think about that." And a few times when I was working through this, the AI went, "Oh, have you seen? And did you notice this? Did you see this? And then what about this? And what did you think about this? And don't forget about that." And I'm like, "Oh, how do you feel about this? What's bothering you about this?" Because all I said was something's bothering, for example, because this was a sales page piece, something's bothering me about this heading, and I can't quite piece it together. So it started asking me questions. Could I have done it on my own? Yes, of course I can. Absolutely.
Yeah, my last couple of weeks obviously have been in sports coaching, and one comment that was made by Mike Israetel in one of the conversations I was listening to was that robots will be smarter than humans in like a decade. And I think it was partially an inflammatory comment to try and irritate the other person in the conversation, but there was also a partial truth in there, a believed truth in there from Mike, which I find interesting because he's not entirely wrong, but he's not entirely right. And I think it
Mm.
depends on how we measure things, as is
And also
most.
how we and also kind of when I hear that, my reaction is immediately, I don't know whether that's even possible because there is a fundamental flaw in the AI's design. Even if it gets better, it will still be a program,
Yeah.
which we are not. It cannot directly perceive. It relies on us to perceive until it can
I mean,
do that.
even with direct perception, which I agree with, I don't think that would be the biggest argument to programs. Like, if you if we take all of the information that we have away from the bot and we leave the bot to be a self-organizing organism, would it maintain itself? That to me would be the question. Would it be able
Mm.
to maintain itself as a self-organizing system? Well, eventually the batteries will run out or the power will
Yeah.
run out. So it wouldn't be able to
Or the memory itself, because it will have a limited amount of memory. No matter how good it gets, it will always forget. I had this
yeah.
when
Well,
I was
it
using.
doesn't. It won't forget. It will either need to learn to forget to throw
Mm.
data out, or it will get capacity and then won't be able to consume any more. So it will reach a limit. Organisms don't because we forget, whatever that means. You were saying you're having a conversation?
Yeah, because during one of the kind of conversations with the AI, it got completely and utterly confused because the message was huge. It was like 3 full days of me just thinking through some ideas and coming up with ideas and just playing around with ideas because I had been in bed or A&E or not able to think straight. And I just wanted to play with some ideas that had been percolating for a while. Um, and it got really long and it started to just not work because it reached capacity,
Hmm.
which I, we don't have that.
What I think to me is the important element of the bot, the AI, the program, the whatever, is it needs something to interact with it for it to do something. Unless you're going to program it to do something on its own, the self-organization element. Like, if there's no command coming from a person or from a written script of you will spin around in circles until your battery runs out, well, it's still running the same script over and over and over. It's not self-organizing according to the environments that it's in because it somewhat rejects the environments it's in if it's not programmed in the commands that it's been given. And I don't see any of the AI tools that are coming out changing any of that right now. And most of
No,
the people that I've seen at the cutting edge of this are talking about the free energy principle, they're talking about active inference, and they're talking about ways of bringing in generative models. Again, terms used from information processing and active inference. Um, bringing in elements of the dynamic environment to the way that the it's not an organism to the way that the robot tries to perceive. And those assumptions, I feel like there's three camps here. But those assumptions are still lost on
yeah.
the information processing side, the modern information processing. I think that's what I'm going to use. I've just decided that is the
Oh,
term I'm going to use.
cool. Because as I was doing this and I was thinking about it, it kept saying that it was perceiving, and I'm like, aha, ah, ah, no.
Traditional information processing.
I know, but no, get out. That is no. It does still use common language like brains and like cognitive load and stuff like it will still use that because it's trained on that.
It's trained on traditional information processing language that humans use because bots are old humans.
Yeah. But even with the custom instructions that I have added in, it's a different interaction. It behaves slightly differently and it will dynamically evolve based on evolve. It will adapt to what I say and how I say it,
Hmm.
which was interesting because it went from being very soft, soft, gentle, gentle to more harsher critique because I asked. It errs on the side of caution
Hmm.
because it's blah
Yeah, it's been
protections, blah 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 blah.
yeah.
But I
Safe
think
environments, morals,
yeah,
values.
to make it safe, which is good because that's kind of what when you're in
I
a
don't agree.
well, no, here's why I say it's good with the caveat that it's not all good. It's good because it like prepares an environment that is safe by default. It is cautious, which means in an environment where basically your whole entire world is being you are criticized for just existing, to have a place to be self-reflected, to self-reflect, okay, cool. To have a place where you can just be self-reflective and you can just say, hey, I'm thinking about this, and you are not immediately told you're wrong, which is unfortunately the experience of many people at the moment. It's an interesting approach. It sucks because then it's passive and
It's kind of it's one of those things inside of software where I want it to be toggleable.
Mm.
I want a toggleable, I want a scale, I want a slider, I want something to be able to change the setting on how safe it is. Because what something I noticed, or I've noticed over the last few weeks, a little bit more, because now I'm paying less attention to the individuals because they are very autonomous in the way that they're training on the trampoline, which is great. I'm not really needed much. Um, is that the parents are very cautious, understandably, but they are starting to constrain the child because the child is now becoming skilled, more skilled, and the parent it goes beyond the parent's understanding of what to do. So they are feeling kind of like oh, that looks dangerous because they haven't seen it before. Whereas the smaller, simpler skills look safer. And they're trying they do one of two things. They either try and add in constraints nicely and the child just ignores it, or they ask me and be like, can you tell them to not do this, or can you tell them to do this a safer way? And there isn't a safer way because they are self-organizing systems. They are safe in themselves. And so with AI, it doesn't recognize what's safe for the user that's using it.
Yeah.
So like I say, errs on the side of caution, but sometimes the caution is actually constraining the development of the person themselves because it's too constraining in the
I
conversation.
literally used an instruction like assume that I am psychologically safe for you to highly critique me. Assume that.
Right.
And then it was more, it still wasn't like
Me.
proper critical, but it was like, oh, you haven't looked in the nuance of this. You haven't considered this here. Like, maybe have a look at this. What is your in? And it was asking me questions. What is your intention with this sentence? This is what I think you're thinking. Is this accurate? Does this match your experience?
Mm.
And so it was
In
still
in
it
my
was quite
cus in my customer support role at Morgan, I use this. I use like to clarify, then explain my understanding. Is that correct? Like I use that question a lot. And
yeah
I feel like the AI bots could be used, like, could do that
yes
for the meanings of your sentences. Like, to clarify, do you mean blah, blah, blah? Is that correct? And if that's correct, then you're like, yes, you've understood the meaning that I've tried to put across. If not, okay, where did we get lost?
yeah
And that's how I interact with a lot of the people that I work with because of different languages.
yeah
And obviously different meanings because meanings are in people, not words.
yeah.
So, yeah, interesting AI conversation. Is there anything else you want to add? Because I want to steer the conversation a little bit.
Something you were saying with the parent thing
Yeah.
reminded me of an interaction with my son yesterday. Because it's obviously we've been sick, and sometimes you just pick your battles as parents. So they've had a lot of free roam like technology time, and I'm noticing the changes in like their energy, their like how they are interacting with the world around them. It's in their phone, which most of the time I'm not really fussed about, but it was getting a little bit like they weren't able to manage their energy. So I just asked. I went, "How do you feel about this?" Because originally it was very much, um, get off of tech, you're not on your tech. Like we're gonna have a tech break, just a bit of time to do other things. Because they spent all their time on their phones or on console, and then they wanted to do some drawing like 10 minutes before bed. And I'm like, hmm. So I said to Aiden yesterday, I was like, we've had a lot of time on tech. And he was asked to go tidy his room because, you know, how boring. Um, and it was like, oh, well, I want to go on tech afterwards. And my question was, okay, how much time do you feel like you've been on tech a lot this week? Like, is that how do you feel about your tech usage? Something along those lines. I don't remember the exact sentence I used. So a lot. The reaction was, and I'm like, you okay? Mm. I was like, do you feel that you maybe want to try a different activity for a bit? How much time have you been on tech? Do you feel comfortable with the amount of time, and do you feel that it's a balance that you want to hold? Mm. And I just turned around and said to him, are these questions really freaking annoying because you believe everything I'm saying, or are you just saying this to make me happy? No. And just watching him recognize like his own behavior and going, yeah, maybe I need a break.
Was that it?
I don't know.
Because
I'm quite intrigued.
the way that for me, in those sorts of situations, I would imagine, because as soon as you ask that first question, the person is going to know from previous like
Yeah,
experiences where the conversation's likely to go. And if
yeah,
there is a rule or constraint in the house that says don't use too much tech, etc., etc., but they
yeah.
like using the tech, and you say, well, how much tech have you been using? The assumption there could be that, oh, I'm now going to be told I can't use that much tech because I've been using more than I could before. Now we're going to add this rule back in.
So, the way that the question was, so I posed that question like that, and I said, like, how do you feel? Do you feel tech, like, do you like it was asking him for his like perspective on it?
But the words of the question and the meanings behind the question are going to be
True.
different. So you might ask the question genuinely asking for, like, how do you feel? But the meaning that he might have got was, I can see where this is going. You're going to tell me to stop using tech. I don't really want to answer this question because now I'm not going to be able to use as much tech as I could before. Like,
That is true. That
because that, to me, as a child, that's the way that I would approach those questions. Like, even if it's an open question, I know, I think I know what you are trying to get me to do, and
mm.
I don't like where this is going to go. So we're just gonna do this back and forth conversation thing until you tell me that I can't use as much tech anymore.
Interesting.
That's the way that I interpreted
Because
those conversations as a
as I
child.
kept going, it was you can like it's a choice. Like, what do you want to do? Like, you can. And I just went, I am concerned of the use, but you tell me whether you feel that it's been an appropriate amount for you and how you're feeling right now,
Did
which
he
still
use
has
tech?
that posing on top. Sorry?
Did he still use tech?
No.
Do you know why he didn't use the tech? Was it to please you, or was it because he didn't want to?
Probably just to please me. My hope is there is a small part of like him going, yeah, good point. This is annoying, but it's true. And I did ask afterwards. I might even ask this morning. I'm like, so, yesterday that really annoying conversation we had, that felt really annoying. I'm
Well,
quite interested to
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say how you felt about the conversation. I'd ask him, like, how do you feel about the conversation yesterday? And if, like, reading the response, depending on how they respond, if they respond in a annoyed way, in a happy way, in a like, if they're trying to avoid the question, then there's probably tense elements there. And you're like, oh, did you feel it was tense? I felt it was a little bit tense. Like, sharing a little bit so that they can open up a little bit. Because if you go in
yeah,
saying, "Oh, was this," the frustrating conversation yesterday, the tone of
the
that
tone set.
conversation has already been set. Like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
yeah, yeah, good
this
point.
was a
Yeah.
frustrating conversation." They might
Mm,
not think about it as a frustrating conversation.
mm. That's a good idea.
Yeah, because you'd add in the assumption like, to start with. But yeah, I would be curious to get their thoughts and let them talk more. Like, how did they feel? And maybe assume. This is the way that I approach the conversations with some of the younger ones. I assume their position rather than my position. So I could assume that Aiden actually wanted to use more tech. So I could assume, oh, did you want to use more tech and you were just not using tech because I was asking questions about it? And that question, likely won't get an answer, but you might be able to read the answer from their body language. If they're more open,
Yeah.
they're likely like, yes, but I don't want to say yes.
Yeah.
And that's where if they're not answering, to me, that's a sign going, okay, this isn't a psychologically safe environment because they don't want to give me the answer.
Yeah.
And that to me would be a warning sign.
Yeah. That's cool.
So, yeah, and that's it's motivational interviewing. It's navigating the situation with the way that the words are used and trying to take like have do both sides of the conversations and see what the reaction is with the other person. Because if they interact, they feel safe to interact at that point, and there's got to be a reason why at that point.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. I guess this relates very well actually with the conversations that I was watching last week. I don't know whether you've seen them. It's in the BJJ Discord group they were shared, but one of them's got 21,000 views, the other one's got just under 2,000 views, and it's about Mike Israetel, who
Mm.
is an exercise scientist on YouTube that's got millions of subscribers and is takes steroids and lifts and bodybuilding and stuff. Um, I think he still takes steroids. I'm not sure. It might be something else that he takes. But I know he takes creatine and other supplements. Anyway, and he was talking with Greg Souders, a BJJ coach that is renowned for his ecological approach, and also spoke with Cal Jones, who is another martial artist coach. I think it's BJJ. I'm not entirely sure, but again, is someone very versed in the ecological literature. And the first conversation, Mike and Greg, got very emotionally heated on Greg's side, which turned into a bit of a shouting match, and I don't think it did a very good showing for the ecological approach. Just my personal preference, personal opinion, sorry. Then the second conversation, Mike left halfway through the conversation because he had to go. He only had an hour available, so it was understandable. But the responses from Cal, because I think Cal was looking to probe, didn't really get to an end of the conversation. It was still in that we're figuring out each other stage. So there wasn't really oh, I get it. Oh, this is where we're at sort of part of the conversation that was missed. And there were lots of comments from Mike that I feel are common comments from the traditional information processing approach, not the modern information processing approach. And what I feel ecological coaches could be doing, or more modern coaching science coaches could be doing, is sharing the research.
Mm.
And not by just going, oh yeah, there's research on this, and the research says this, is actually explaining or going into the studies and forgetting the explanation. Like forget information processing, forget working memory, forget ecological psychology, forget all of that, because that's philosophy. That's philosophy. Or it's not philosophy, but without the philosophy, it becomes extremely difficult to understand the differing perspectives. And philosophy is uh, we don't know because it's
Yeah.
philosophy. So if we forget the explanations and look at the interventions and the studies and go, if we do this, we're more likely to get this result. If we do this, we're more likely to get that result. Once we've done that and we've shared that actually random practice is very beneficial, block practice is not so beneficial when we're trying to get these sorts of outcomes, adding variability is really helpful when we're doing this, highly constrained practice is more effective if we want to do that. Bringing in this element and building up a bank of assumptions and trends, then going, well, if we look at this explanation, it doesn't really explain why this works like this. But if we look at this explanation, the ecological approach, it does explain why this does this. And the modern information processing approach also explains why some of the modern coaching science results work the way they do. Do they have different fundamental assumptions, the modern information processing and the ecological psychology? Yes, but they both explain the trends, the
Mm.
intervention trends. The traditional information processing approach doesn't.
Mm.
And that is where a lot of people still sit.
Mm.
And so the conversations that I've seen, I'm thinking of doing a explanation reaction, deep dive, science explained, science applied, some kind of video um, to bring the studies in the forefront.
Mm.
Um, from your side, when you were exploring ecological psychology, because I knew you were familiar with Gestalt psychology, did you look at the intervention studies or did you look at the psychology, philosophy, abstract things?
So, my experience was looking at the relating the practical elements of Gestalt and exploring it from an ecological lens in the best way possible. Like just thinking about what I wanted to do and achieve with the I looked at the philosophy and was like, what matters to me? What's important to me right now? What do I need from this? Because I could talk philosophy forever, but it's not really going to help me do the things I want to do. Like, what do I need and what don't I need? I don't need to go deep diving into bifurcations, etc., etc. Like, for
Oh,
me,
it's quantum physics.
but it's fun and it's nerdy, and when I feel like it, I'll go do it. But for me, the important part was just like just the direct perception. If we assume direct perception and we minimize the focus of attention on the brain and turn it into the environment organism relationship, what does that mean? What does that mean practically? Like, what is if we shift, if that is true, what does that mean for me?
So, would your attention be on the relationship between the environment and the organism rather than the organism instead of direct perception? Because direct perception is one thing,
Hmm.
environment, organism, or organism,
I
environment,
think I
whichever way you
did.
want to
I think
say.
I did go environment organism first because, of course, I came from a tech background, and
Mm.
I genuinely believe that tech is part of like that interaction. It is a fundamental part of what we do.
Look at the noise study inside of Introduction to Ecological Psychology with the mouse.
Exactly. And so it's like I think I took it from that approach first, and then I moved into direct perception with the conversations with you and that kind of like slow burn. But just starting from that, because that's not far off Gestalt as well. So it was fairly close to Gestalt, but just simpler. Gestalt still added layers and layers of stuff,
Yes.
whereas we interact with the organism, us interacts with the environment around us and the environment, and they're connected and it works together. And perception, we perceive and we act. That those yummy. Like, what am I perceiving? How will I behave?
Oh,
Once I grasped that, I just didn't care. It was more fun to explore everything else. In terms of the practical elements for me, once I grasped that enough, that was it. Like, I was sold on the concept. I can use that.
I, I think for me, when I'm looking at the approaches, again, whether it's modern, traditional, ecological, the focus on attention and intention. What are you intending to do? Where is the useful information? Like, where do I actually need to pay attention? Once you've got those two things, or once you can explore those two things effectively, the rest of the science, it's not redundant, but it's not
Yeah,
needed.
I think that's where I've got recently. Like for me, as I've been doing my journey, it was this, and now attention and intention. Where is my intention? What is my intention? No. That was what that has been my next step. That is where I literally just left the literature behind because why?
You can create practice design from that. The way that I
Yeah.
look at most of my practice design, I guess this is kind of like a shortcut to ecological psychology or the constraints-led approach. is okay, what's the intention? What's the goal? What's the win condition of this practice? And then where where do I think the individuals will find the most useful information to do whatever it is they're trying to do? So goal is X. Where do I think they'll find information? A, B, C. Are they looking at ABC or are they looking at apple, oranges, and bananas? If they're looking at bananas, let's try and constrain it so they don't. But maybe bananas are useful,
Yeah.
and and you then create the practice design around that. It doesn't need much else. Whereas the traditional approaches would be similar because you can still explain it similarly. Oh, the intention is to do this skill. Their attention needs to be at all of these internal cue points. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
yep, that is still taking the approach. But why? Like, why would you do those things? And that is where I think the conversation
Yeah,
happens
because
afterwards.
there's the you're doing this thing because you're developing the skill. Because that's what you're meant to do. You're doing it for the purpose of the skill, not for the purpose of what you actually want to achieve. For example, a good example here is just this thing that I'm making of like you're using the AI, you're learning how to use AI so that you can get stuff done. Or the intention is self-reflection. It like I want to reflect more even when I'm sick. Like that is the intention. Whenever I'm fine and I have the capacity to, I'll do it myself because I can. I have a coach. I have a therapist. All of those things ain't gonna go nowhere because human interaction is needed. We need that. That's just a fact. So all of that's there, but when they're not there, and I am sat in this room trying to figure stuff out, and I've got a headache, and I'm tired, and my kids are screaming, and my budgies are going really loud, and I just need to find a next step to go that way, I'll just go and ask and explore that. And that's the intention. Versus I'm developing a skill. Why? But I can develop a skill all the time. Why do I need AI? Well, you don't,
But it can help constrain. Yeah.
but it can help
The
construct.
the rationale conversation, I think, is where the coaching science comes in because the practice design intention attention, I think, can be used by anyone. The rationale is where you go from coaching to effective coaching or practice to effective practice.
Yeah,
And the rationale is where a lot of people tend to start for whatever reason, which is, I mean, there's no wrong here. But if you're starting at the rationale, but you haven't looked at the practice itself, you're missing like the point.
yeah,
And that's where I think those conversations lacked some context because Mike was coming into the conversation looking at abstract philosophy because that's what the ecological practitioners were exploring. They were exploring perception, direct perception, action, coupling, scaling, relationships of environments, and Mike was there kind of sitting at the start going, yeah, but that's just I'm trying to do this. I can do this like that. Yeah, you can. You certainly can. But it's not as effective because of these things over here. But these things over here, if he hasn't read them or doesn't know them or isn't aware of them, these things over here, it's pointless pointing at it.
yeah. And it doesn't help. It's not useful. It's not valuable,
Mm.
which is how I found as I was going through my experience. And I read the papers and I'm just like, yeah, cool, this is fun. And I'd love to debate this till the cows come home. But
How do I use it?
how do I do my shit? Because I
Yeah,
just want to do my shit and get on with my life because I don't want to spend all my time in research papers. It's fun.
I
I
do.
like
I
the
do.
idea. I know you do. I don't. I just want to do my work and spend time with my kids and play some games and interact with the world around me, and
Mm.
that's it. Like,
Yeah. I'm kind of like sitting here because do you know Jeff Nippard on YouTube? No, so he's got this reputation for being a science-based bodybuilder. He basically brings in exercise science to bodybuilding and talks about it on YouTube. That's how he grew. Mike Israetel has done something similar. Mike and Jeff are good friends, and then there's loads of others that are similar. They're exercise scientists that talk about the science behind exercise. Um, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, exercise science is one thing, but coaching science is another, because coaching science brings in skill development, motor learning, but also philosophy, psychology, and other elements of the way humans behave, human behavior. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, if Jeff can be the the scientific bodybuilder and Mike Israel can be the exercise scientist, maybe I can be the coaching scientist.
That'd be cool.
But I have no idea how that would work. And I feel like science would need to be hard science. It couldn't be soft science, i.e. quantitative, not qualitative.
Mm.
Because if I go in with philosophy and psychology, it's more abstract.
How can you do that with
Interventions.
cool?
Interventions, and then exploring the discussion section more. Exercise scientists, apologies for exercise scientists listening to this, tend to read the abstract, look at the results section, and then go, oh, okay, that's what's happened. Let's do this thing because this intervention worked, or let's not do this thing because this intervention didn't work. Because muscles are, well, they're less dynamic than humans. Muscles, if you add stress, certain stresses get certain responses. Humans, if you add stress, instead of there being one or two responses, i.e., it gets bigger or it gets smaller, or there's a delayed in size growth, humans could do lots of different things. And so the discussion section is, I would argue, more important. A perfect example of this is the video that I've just scripted and recorded. It's about Quiet Eye. Are you familiar? And this is another example of coaching science. Quiet eye is, it's got various definitions, but the simplest definition is the duration between first fixation and first action. So when someone starts to, let's say a basketball free throw, they're looking at the basketball hoop. When they start looking, and then before they start to move to take the free throw is the quiet eye.
Mm.
Experts, I put air quotes in experts, have longer quiet eye when compared to experts have longer quiet eye when compared to non-experts, and most performance seems to show that more quiet eye is better, higher performance. But what does that mean? Does that mean you need to look at the basketball hoop for like a really long time and then take a shot? No, because that doesn't help. So it's the small interactions in that quiet eye time period, which, by the way, is like 2 milliseconds, 2000 milliseconds, like a second and a half, maybe 2 seconds max. So it's not like really easy to go, oh yeah, that was a really good quiet eye, or no, that was a really bad quiet eye. Um, but it's a topic that's discussed, well, that's studied. But when it's discussed, the nuances about what you could do inside of that quiet eye is where we get the benefit. And I watched a video. It's got like 1.3 million views on it. It's like 20-minute video. Rob Gray's in it, like towards the end, talking about repetition without repetition and variability. Very brief clips, even though it's not really emphasized that much. And then JJ Gibson's actually referenced right at the start of the video. I'm like, oh, this is great. They're going to talk about direct perception, and they don't. They talk about quiet eye. I'm like, okay. And quiet eye is used as a broad topic, as an abstract, as a theory thing. You're like, oh, more quiet eye equals better performance. Yeah, that's great. Cool. But what is it? How do you use it? And simple answer, what and where to pay attention, which, if you look at the studies, is education of attention. And when you look at some of Joan Vickers is the academic that this person was talking about. If you look at the discussion section, not the results section or the conclusion or the abstract, you look at the discussion section. Do you know what it references? The constraints model and the constraints-led approach to coaching. But it's not mentioned at all in the video because they're talking about quiet eye. And do you know what happens in the video? They briefly mention the two different approaches to perception, and then he explains that the information is stored in their head and they're creating predictions, and that both approaches discuss this. And I'm like, no, they don't. No, they do not. But it was a really good exposure for indirect and direct perception because there are people that I mentioned, and I assume I think it's Michael, the person that did the video, spoke with Rob Gray because there's a recording conversation. So I assume they spoke and they discussed direct perception and indirect perception, and prospective control, etc., etc. But quiet eye, as an abstract topic in philosophy, has been tested with interventions. Those interventions, albeit very limiting, show results. Those results can then be interpreted in different ways, but the discussion section suggests, oh, well, if we work on these things, or we look at these things, and we try and encourage these things, such as Rob Gray's baseball study. How do you get people to hit something higher? Put a board in front of them so they have to hit the ball over it. There you go. Um, those things work. So it's bringing in quantitative numbers to interventions, and those interventions being justified by rationales, and the rationales then being put in the discussion section. So it's like, hey, here's the numbers, but why did the numbers work? This discussion bit. Exercise science, here's the numbers, here's more numbers, here's more numbers. Yeah, let's do that.
Mm.
Art and science of coaching, sports science. Yeah, the art bit in the exercise science is often forgotten. I mean, Jeff and Mike talk about the art of sports science, but those videos don't get anywhere near as many views.
They never do. It's like us when we did the productivity stuff and we were talking about the philosophy of our productivity versus the tech.
Yeah. Yep.
It
People just
never
want the
got
quick
views.
answers. What app's
Yeah.
best? So,
Whichever one works for you.
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so if you come across any studies that I haven't come across,
Let's be very real here. That is never gonna happen. Like,
in sport, no, but in other fields.
that's true.
Because in other fields, if you're looking at constraining whatever it might be in business and conversations and interactions, and you find some results that are interesting, or you find a study that discusses performance improvements or categories or groupings of different types of people in certain ways, there might be a reference study in there that has some objective data that we could use. Well, I say we, I could use. So yeah, so
Mm,
if you come across any, let me know. Point them in my direction. Am I?
I will.
Yes. Anything else you want to add
Oh,
on?
there's loads, but I think it will need to be another episode because we could probably talk about it for a while.
Okay. Right. Well, happy Mother's Day, everyone. I know it's going to come out like a
Yeah.
week after, but happy Mother's Day, everyone. And we'll talk to you all next time.
Bye.